Hi, everyone. I'm Dr. Seth, psychologist, and I wanted to share a point in one follow up video. I've done a couple other videos on this Nancy Guthrie missing case, but I just wanted to share another point that I think is really important as the public empathy and I think anxiety level of so many people familiar with this story as it grows and really escalates. One of the things that I think is really important to look at is to look at this from a psychological assessment perspective. And that's often how I look at things as a clinical psychologist. When you are trained in clinical psychology, you learn psychological testing and you learn really comprehensive assessment skills. And one of the things that you look at is thinking, the type of thinking one engages in. And one of the reasons why I think this Nancy Guthrie case has caused such an extreme emotional reaction in people is because of how confusing it is. And part of why that is related to the ransom notes. Now, the first ransom note that was received, it was received reportedly at the end of the second day after she had been reported missing. So she was first reported missing on a Sunday in the morning. And then later, the following day, and not just on the second day that she was reported missing, but at the end of the second day, reported missing. For abductions, that is a significant delay in terms of communicating, sending that ransom note. Now, with this particular case, there seems to be so much confusion in the very beginning about what reports were confirmed and what reports were not. And so that just added to a lot of confusion. But the public's takeaway from a lot of the communications from the sheriff's department originally were that this is a woman who needs daily medication and that it was not clear that the medications were taken with her. It was not clear that she actually had these medications. Now, here's the part that's important psychologically. When we think about this from an assessment perspective psychologically, and we look at the thinking, if you take a person who engages in clear, cohesive thinking, clinically, what we would call that is rational thinking, goal-directed thinking, thinking that is linear and cohesive, okay? When we think about that individual, going to abduct an individual who is 84 years old. Clear, goal-directed thinking would say, if the motivation is for money, if there is a mercenary motivation and we want to keep this individual alive. Again, a person with goal-directed thinking would look around the environment and would imagine, because most individuals at 84 are taking some types of medications, would simply go to a medicine cabinet in the bathroom and just clear it out and throw things in a bag if there's limited time. They may take articles of clothing to keep that person comfortable. Again, clear goal-directed thinking would want to send the message to those who would later discover that she's missing, that care was taken to help meet this individual's needs. Again, all in the purpose of keeping her alive, okay? Now, we don't know, of course, many details about this case. Law enforcement always has to keep critical details private for obvious reasons. But the public's reaction to this, and what I think is the public's anxiety about this. Yes, on the one hand, there are people that are frustrated by the sort of wall-to-wall media coverage about this, noting that there are so many missing children, for example, who don't get half the media attention. Actually, scratch that, not half, not even a fraction of the media percentage. And that is a valid frustration. But there are a lot of other people that, because of the nature of this case, an 84-year-old woman, this is triggering a lot of anxiety for elderly individuals, especially elderly individuals who live alone. And this is also triggering a lot of anxiety and panic to some extent, I think, for their children's generation, thinking and worrying about their parents, picturing having the empathy if that were to happen to their parent, how they would feel. And so a lot of the world that is watching this really on some level wants the relief to know what happened here, really ideally wanted her to come home safe so that they could sort of appease their own real world anxieties about what this would mean if this happened to them, picturing this if this happened to them. But here is the most important point psychologically, I believe, the takeaway for everyone looking at this, aside from some of the pragmatic, real world realities. What can each one of us learn from this situation in terms of trying to increase safety, physical safety at one's home, communication devices, things like that? Those are the real world realities that hopefully people will take away in time from this case. But the other point is that this case can serve as a reminder about what it means when we, in I say the communal we, the we, human nature, finds themselves in situations where they feel overwhelmed and confused, where they find themselves getting sucked into details that don't seem to add up. For example, a detail like an abduction of an 84-year-old woman, and yet no known, at least to the public, no known attempts to secure medications, to secure clothing, things like that. And a ransom note that doesn't just come around the time of the abduction, but at the end of the second day after reporting. See, human nature says it doesn't add up. And this happens all the time. Think, for example, about so many difficult situations that are completely unrelated in your own life. This is why so many times people stay in unhealthy, dysfunctional relationships, because they forget what is their number one internal rule, that life is not meant to be suffered as a pattern for years and years. This is why so many people stay in miserable job situations, because they often find themselves focusing on the little details as opposed to sticking to an internal rule, an internal protocol in life that could help them, which is that I don't tolerate working in a situation with a boss who mistreats me. I cannot and I will not. These are examples of how so many people find themselves staying in dysfunctional situations. Why? Because they often get sucked into the stimulation, the minutia, the details of situations, and they lose perspective on the big picture. And so when it comes to this case, from a very sort of psychologically common sense perspective, when we look at the ransom note and the details that I shared about it, my question is this just another example of the public's inclination, the human nature inclination to believe or get sucked into details and lose perspective on the big picture, what the rational explanation is? I'm Dr. Seth, psychologist.